My family tried to ruin my wedding because they didn't approve of my husband, so I cut ties and married him anyway. I'm Rosie, 28F, and this is the story of how my wedding became the catalyst that exposed years of toxic family dynamics and ultimately forced me to choose between my happiness and keeping the peace. I never thought planning what should have been the happiest day of my life would result in losing half my family. But here we are. My family consists of my parents, Ronald, 58M, and Linda, 55F, my older brother Jack, 32M, and my younger sister Megan, 24F. We also have my grandmother Patricia, 81F, who has always been the matriarch of our family. Growing up, I was always the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made sure everyone got along. The drama started when I got engaged to my fiancé David, 30M, last year. David comes from a very different background than my family. He's mixed race, his parents are divorced, and he works as a freelance graphic designer. My family has always been very traditional, very concerned about appearances, and very set in their ways about what constitutes a proper family. When I first brought David home 2 years ago, the reception was lukewarm at best. My parents were polite but distant. Jack made subtle comments about David's career stability, and Megan kept asking intrusive questions about his family background. Only my grandmother seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him, which surprised me because she's usually the most traditional of all of us. The engagement itself went smoothly. David proposed during a weekend getaway, and I was over the moon. When we announced it to my family, they congratulated us, but I could sense underlying tension. My mother immediately started making comments about wedding planning and how expensive everything would be. My father asked pointed questions about David's financial situation and whether he could properly provide for me. Jack's reaction was the most concerning. He pulled me aside after dinner and said he was worried I was rushing into marriage with someone I barely knew. This was rich coming from him, considering he proposed to his wife Amanda, 29, after dating for only 8 months. But when I pointed this out, he said that was different because Eliza came from a good family that our parents already knew and approved of. The real problem started when we began planning the wedding. David and I wanted a relatively small, intimate ceremony with about 80 guests. We chose a beautiful garden venue that wasn't a traditional church, which immediately caused issues with my mother. She kept insisting that a real wedding had to be in a church, and that our chosen venue looked too casual for such an important occasion. My parents also had strong opinions about the guest list. They wanted to invite distant relatives and family friends that David and I barely knew, while cutting some of David's close friends because they thought 80 people was already too many. When I explained that we wanted to keep it intimate with people who were actually important to us, my father accused me of being selfish and not considering family obligations. The situation escalated when we discussed the wedding party. David wanted his best friend Marcus, 28M, to be his best man. Sean happens to be black, and while my family never said anything explicitly racist, their discomfort was obvious. Jack suggested that maybe David should ask his brother instead, even though David explained that he and his brother weren't that close. My mother kept making comments about how the wedding photos would look, which made my skin crawl. For my maid of honor, I chose my college best friend Lisa, 27F, instead of my sister Megan. Lisa and I have been through everything together, and I couldn't imagine anyone else standing beside me on my wedding day. But Megan was devastated. She cried to our parents about how hurt she was, and they immediately took her side. My mother called me the next day and spent an hour lecturing me about family loyalty and how I was breaking Megan's heart by choosing an outsider over my own sister. When I tried to explain that Lisa had been my closest friend for years and that Megan and I, while we loved each other, weren't particularly close, my mother accused me of being cold and calculating. The breaking point came when we were discussing the reception menu. David and I wanted to include some dishes that reflected his cultural background, alongside more traditional options. We thought it would be a nice way to honor both sides of our families and give guests some variety. Jack exploded when he heard about this. He said we were making the wedding too ethnic, and that our older relatives wouldn't know what to eat. When I asked him what he meant by too ethnic, he backpedaled, but the damage was done. He spent the next 20 minutes explaining how weddings should focus on bringing families together, not highlighting differences. My grandmother, surprisingly, was the only one who supported our menu choices. She said she was excited to try new foods and that it sounded like a wonderful way to celebrate our union. But she was outnumbered by the rest of the family, who kept pushing for a more traditional reception. The financial aspect became another battleground. My parents had offered to contribute $15,000 toward the wedding, which David and I were grateful for. But they seemed to think this gave them veto power over all our decisions. Every time we chose something they didn't approve of, they'd threaten to withdraw their financial support. When I tried to address this pattern with my mother, she said they were just trying to help us avoid mistakes that would embarrass the family. She kept mentioning what people would think and how important it was to maintain our family's reputation in the community. I realized that for her, the wedding wasn't about celebrating David and me. It was about projecting the right image to their social circle. 3 months before the wedding, things came to a head during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner. We were discussing final details when Jack started questioning David directly about his career plans and financial goals. The conversation quickly became aggressive, with Jack implying that David wasn't ambitious enough and that he was worried about me settling for someone who couldn't match my earning potential. David handled it with grace, explaining his career path and his goals for growing his design business. But Jack wasn't satisfied. He started making comments about the instability of freelance work and how important it was for husbands to provide security for their wives. I could see David getting uncomfortable, and I finally snapped. I told Jack that his concerns were inappropriate and that my relationship with David wasn't his business. I pointed out that David was successful in his field and that we were both adults capable of making our own financial decisions. Jack responded by accusing me of being defensive and said he was just looking out for my best interests as my older brother. That's when my father chimed in, supporting Jack and saying that the family had legitimate concerns about David's ability to provide for me long term. My mother nodded along, adding that they just wanted me to be happy and secure. I looked around the table and realized that none of them saw David as a real person, just a collection of characteristics they found inadequate. The next morning, I called my grandmother to vent about the dinner. She listened quietly and then said something that changed my perspective entirely. She told me that she had faced similar opposition from her own family when she married my grandfather because he came from a different social class. She said she regretted letting their opinions affect her wedding planning and wished she had stood up for herself more firmly. Patricia also revealed something I hadn't known. My parents had been discussing their concerns about David with other family members behind my back. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to all apparently had opinions about my choice of husband. She said some of the conversations had been quite harsh, with family members questioning David's character based solely on his background and career. This revelation was devastating. I realized that while I had been trying to include my family in the wedding planning and make compromises to keep everyone happy, they had been systematically undermining my relationship and spreading doubt about my fiancé throughout our extended family. I decided to have a serious conversation with my parents about boundaries. I sat them down and explained that while I valued their input, the constant criticism of David and attempts to control every aspect of our wedding were causing me serious stress and damaging our relationship. I asked them to either support our choices or step back from the planning process. My mother's response was to burst into tears. She said I was being ungrateful and that she was only trying to help me have a perfect wedding. She claimed that all the family members who had expressed concerns about David were just worried about my happiness, not judging him personally. When I asked for specifics about what they were worried about, she couldn't give me any concrete examples beyond vague concerns about compatibility and different backgrounds. My father was more direct, but no less hurtful. He said that as parents, they had a right to express their concerns about my life choices. He accused me of being too emotional and not thinking clearly about the long-term implications of marrying someone so different from our family. When I asked him to explain what he meant by different, he mentioned David's race, his family structure, and his career, basically confirming all my worst fears about their motivations. The conversation ended with my parents threatening to boycott the wedding if I didn't make changes to accommodate their concerns. They wanted me to have the ceremony in a church, invite their extended guest list, choose Megan as maid of honor, and reconsider the reception menu. They also wanted David to ask Jack to be in the wedding party as a gesture of respect to the family. I was heartbroken but not surprised. I gave them a week to think about their ultimatum and decide whether they wanted to be part of our celebration or not. I also called Megan and Jack to let them know what was happening and give them a chance to express their own feelings about the situation. Megan's response was typical. She cried and accused me of tearing the family apart over a wedding. She said she didn't understand why I was being so stubborn about details that didn't really matter. When I explained that it wasn't about the details but about the principle of making our own choices as adults, she said I was overthinking everything and should just give in to keep the peace. Jack was more aggressive. He said I was being selfish and immature, and that I was lucky the family cared enough to be involved in my wedding planning. He accused me of using the wedding as an excuse to reject family values and traditions. When I pointed out that his own wedding had included several non-traditional elements, he said that was different because Alice understood the importance of family harmony. During this week of waiting for their decision, I had long conversations with David about how to handle the situation. He was hurt by my family's treatment of him, but didn't want to be the cause of a permanent rift. He offered to make compromises if it would help, but I realized that compromising would just validate their behavior and set a precedent for them to control other aspects of our life together. I also talked to Lisa, who helped me see the situation more clearly. She pointed out that my family's demands weren't really about the wedding, they were about control and their discomfort with David. She reminded me that I had spent years being the family peacekeeper, always giving in to avoid conflict, and that this pattern wasn't healthy for me or my relationship. My grandmother called me toward the end of the week with some shocking news. She had overheard a conversation between my parents and Jack where they discussed their backup plan if I didn't give in to their demands. They were apparently hoping that the stress of planning the wedding without family support would cause problems in my relationship with David. Jack had actually said that if David really loved me, he would want to make peace with the family, and if he didn't, then maybe I would realize he wasn't the right person for me. This revelation was devastating because it showed that their opposition wasn't just about wedding planning. They were actively hoping my engagement would fail. My own family was sabotaging my happiness because they couldn't accept my choice of partner. When the week was up, I called my parents and told them that the wedding would proceed as planned. I said they were welcome to attend and celebrate with us, but that I wouldn't be making any more changes to accommodate their demands. I also made it clear that any further attempts to undermine my relationship with David would result in reduced contact with them. My mother hung up on me. My father called back an hour later to say that they wouldn't be attending the wedding under those conditions. He said I was choosing a stranger over my own family and that I would regret this decision when my marriage failed and I needed family support. Jack and Megan also declined to attend, though Megan said she might reconsider if I changed my mind about the maid of honor situation. I was heartbroken but also relieved. The idea of having people at my wedding who didn't support my marriage felt wrong. The wedding planning continued with just David's family and our friends. His parents, Michael, 52M, and Jennifer, 49M, were divorced but managed to be civil for the occasion. They both made efforts to include me in their families and were excited about the wedding. His sister Rachel, 26F, offered to help with planning, and his brother Tom, 34M, gave David advice about married life. The contrast between the two families was stark. While David's family asked questions about our plans out of genuine interest and offered help where they could, my family had treated the wedding as something to be controlled and managed according to their preferences. As the wedding date approached, I found myself grieving the loss of the family celebration I had always imagined. I had dreamed of walking down the aisle with my father, having my siblings stand beside me, and celebrating with all the people who had shaped my life. Instead, I was planning a wedding where half my family would be absent by choice. My grandmother was the only member of my immediate family who attended the wedding. She walked me down the aisle in place of my father, and her presence meant everything to me. She gave a beautiful speech at the reception about love transcending differences and the importance of choosing your own path in life. The wedding itself was everything David and I had hoped for. The garden venue was perfect, our friends and his family celebrated with genuine joy, and the food was delicious. Several guests commented on how personal and meaningful the ceremony felt. But there was an undercurrent of sadness throughout the day because of the family members who had chosen not to be there. After we returned from our honeymoon, the reality of the family rift set in. My parents didn't call to congratulate us or ask about the wedding. Jack posted on social media about family loyalty and how some people abandon their roots when they think they've outgrown them. Megan sent me a text saying she hoped I was happy with my choices. The silence from my immediate family was painful, but I started to realize how much mental energy I had been spending on managing their emotions and opinions. Without their constant criticism and control, David and I were able to focus on building our life together without external pressure. 6 months after the wedding, my mother finally called. She said she missed me and wanted to repair our relationship. When I asked if that meant she was ready to accept David and treat him with respect, she said she was willing to try, but hoped I could understand why the wedding situation had been difficult for them. I agreed to meet her for lunch, hoping we could find a way forward. But within minutes of sitting down, she was making comments about how thin I looked and asking whether married life was what I had expected. When I tried to share positive news about David's business growth and our apartment renovation, she changed the subject. The lunch ended badly when she suggested that David and I should consider having our marriage blessed in a church ceremony that the family could attend. She said it would be a way to heal the rift and give everyone a chance to celebrate our union properly. When I explained that we were already married and didn't need a religious ceremony, she said I was being stubborn again. I realized that my mother wasn't interested in accepting our marriage as it was. She wanted us to do it over in a way that fit her vision of how things should be. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about her getting her way after the fact. David and I decided to limit contact with my immediate family to what was absolutely necessary. We would attend major family events if invited, but we wouldn't be seeking out opportunities to spend time with people who had made it clear they didn't support our marriage. This decision was difficult, but necessary for our mental health and marriage. We had both been walking on eggshells, waiting for the next criticism or attempt at control. Setting boundaries allowed us to enjoy being newlyweds without constantly defending our choices. My grandmother became our main connection to the family. She would give us updates on what everyone was doing and occasionally mediate when tensions needed to be addressed. She also became a stronger advocate for us within the family, calling out inappropriate comments and making it clear that she supported our marriage. A year after the wedding, Jack got divorced. The irony wasn't lost on me that the brother who had questioned David's commitment and stability was now going through his own marriage breakdown. When I heard the news through my grandmother, I felt sad for Jack, but also vindicated in my decision to ignore his advice about relationships. Jack reached out to me during his divorce proceedings, apparently hoping I would provide emotional support. When we talked on the phone, he seemed to expect me to set aside our wedding conflict and be there for him as his sister. I was willing to offer support, but I wasn't willing to pretend that his behavior toward David and me had been acceptable. During our conversation, Jack admitted that some of his opposition to David had been based on jealousy. He said seeing me in a happy relationship had made him realize that his own marriage lacked the connection and partnership that David and I obviously shared. He also acknowledged that his concerns about David's career had been unfair, especially since David's design business was now more successful than Jack's corporate job. This conversation was progress, but it also highlighted how much damage had been done by the wedding conflict. Jack's apology was appreciated, but it couldn't undo the stress and pain his behavior had caused during what should have been one of the happiest times of my life. As I write this, it's been 2 years since our wedding. David and I are happy and settled in our marriage. We're talking about starting a family, and I'm excited about the prospect of raising children with someone who truly partners with me in life decisions. My relationship with my immediate family remains strained but stable. We exchange pleasantries at family gatherings and maintain polite contact, but we're not close. Megan has started to warm up to David, probably because she's realized that our marriage isn't going anywhere and that her hostility was only hurting her relationship with me. My parents still struggle with fully accepting David, but they've learned to keep their opinions to themselves. They seem to have realized that their attempts to control my choices only pushed me further away. We have dinner together occasionally, and they're civil to David, which is progress even if it's not ideal. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that you can't maintain relationships by constantly sacrificing your own happiness and autonomy. I spent years trying to keep my family happy by being the compliant daughter who didn't rock the boat. But when it came to the most important decision of my life, who to marry, I had to choose between my family's approval and my own happiness. I chose happiness, and I don't regret it. The wedding conflict revealed long-standing patterns of control and judgment in my family that I had been enabling by always giving in to keep the peace. Standing up for myself and David was the right choice, even though it cost me some relationships. David and I are building a life based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. We support each other's dreams and face challenges together as a team. We have friends who celebrate our successes and family members, like my grandmother and David's family, who love and accept us as we are. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had given in to my family's demands. Would we have had a church wedding with 200 guests and a traditional menu? Probably. Would my family have continued to try to control other aspects of our marriage? Definitely. Would I have been happy with those compromises? I doubt it. The wedding was just the beginning. If I had established a pattern of giving in to their demands about our marriage, they would have expected the same level of control over our career decisions, where we lived, how we raised our children, and every other major life choice. Standing firm on the wedding was really about establishing boundaries for our entire future together. Looking back, I'm grateful that the conflict happened when it did. It was painful, but it clarified where everyone stood and allowed me to make informed decisions about what kind of relationships I wanted to maintain. Some family relationships survived and even strengthened, while others revealed themselves to be based on control rather than love. To anyone facing similar family pressure around their wedding or marriage, my advice is to remember that your wedding day is about you and your partner, not about managing other people's expectations or emotions. The people who truly love and support you will find a way to celebrate with you, even if your choices aren't what they would have chosen for themselves. The family you create with your spouse is your primary family now. Protecting that relationship and building it on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values is more important than maintaining the approval of people who can't accept your choices. It's hard to disappoint people you love, but it's harder to live a life that isn't authentically your own. Our marriage has thrived because we established early on that we are a team, and that our decisions are made together without undue influence from external pressures. The wedding conflict was painful, but it ultimately made us stronger as a couple and clearer about our priorities as a family unit.